Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of HR Unplugged. I am your host with the most, Jonathan, MJ, whatever you like, it works with me. Today I just have a very vibrant and specialist in this HR field. We're just going to be touching on the different elements and dynamics in the workplace. Without any further ado and anticipation, I'd like us to just get right into it with our first panelist. Kim, hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good.
I'm amazing. So I hear you're the person to talk to when it comes to organizational behavior.
Yes, I am.
How about you just give us a taste of that?
Okay, no problem. So organizational behavior is defined by Robbins and Judge as a field of study that looks at the impact individuals, groups, and structures have on behavior within an organization. And the aim is to use this knowledge to improve the effectiveness. But in simpler words, it's basically how individuals act within an organization. And people might wonder, why do we need to know about organizational behavior? And that is because every company and organization consists of people, and in order for a company to run smoothly, managers need to understand why employees behave the way they do.
Could you please provide a practical example of organizational behavior so that we can understand better?
Yes, I can. So a few years ago, Google had an experiment where they basically wanted to understand why certain teams were more effective than other teams. And in doing so, they found things were psychological safety. So managers who understood that providing a safe environment led to employees to share ideas freely and to speak freely without fear of judgment were able to be more effective.
That is actually very insightful. I think it opens the path in what we're going to be talking about today. And Celeste.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm Kelly.
I'm amazing. Looking beautiful and vibrant as always. So I'd just like to ask you, how would you say, the motivation and attitude, they tend to, shape the behavior in the workplace for both employees and employers?
So today we're diving into something that usually affects each and every one of us who's ever had a job: motivation. Not just what makes us tick, but how different theories of motivation can actually affect attitudes and behaviors at work. So I'm gonna touch on some of my core favorite theories in history. So we're gonna first look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So think of motivation as a staircase. At the very bottom, you have your basic needs, things like food, water, and in the workplace, your salary and job security. That's stage one. Once that's sorted, you climb onto the next steps, which is safety, social needs, and esteem. And right at the top, self-actualization, which basically means reaching your full potential. So Maslow's big idea was that you can't skip steps. If your pay isn't covering your bills, you're not exactly focused on creative projects or leadership opportunities. But once those lower needs are sorted, you start wanting reception, personal growth, and meaningful work. So we're now going to look at Herzberg's two-factor theory. So Herzberg took a little bit of a different approach. He split it into two groups. So we look at hygiene factors and we look at motivators. So hygiene factors are things like your salary, working conditions, and company policies. If those are bad, you are unhappy. If they are good, you are not necessarily motivated, but you complain less. And then we have our motivators, which is things like recognition, achievement, and responsibilities. These are the real drivers of satisfaction. So think of it like this: fixing the aircon in the office stops people from complaining about the heat, but giving someone ownership of a big project, that's what gets them excited and invested. Yeah.
And I think since you're speaking on theories, there was
Yeah.
something I came across, I think a few months ago, and it had a very funny name to it. I think it was Vroom's expectancy theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I couldn't really get clarity on it. Do you mind just touching on that for me and
Okay.
others?
Actually, one of my favorite theories. I think it's very interesting. So, Vroom took a more logical approach. He said motivation comes from mental calculation, which I actually believe. So, we look at three things: we look at expectancy, we look at instrumentality, and valence. So, with expectancy, you have the mentality that if you put in the effort, will you actually perform well? And with instrumentality, you ask yourself, if I perform well, will I get a reward? And with valence, you don't really care about the reward. You kind of disregard it. So if you work hard and meet targets and your boss doesn't reward you or motivate you, your motivation is going to tank. But if you work hard and you get recognition, you are rewarded, then your commitment shoots up. So another theory, one last theory that I'm going to touch on is McGregor's theory X and Y, which I think is probably the most realist theory that is out there, because I think many of us have actually seen this in the workplace. So this one is about management style, right? So McGregor said that leaders often have one of two mindsets, which is theory X and theory Y. So theory X, managers believe employees are lazy, that they need close, supervision. Whereas theory Y, managers believe that employees are self-motivated, they can be trusted, and they actually want the responsibility. So this assumption kind of shapes the vibe of the workplace. That's why under theory X, you're likely to see employees disengaged and demotivated. Whereas with theory Y, you find them actually committed to what they are doing because of the amount of faith the managers have on them.
I think you made some very valid points. I guess it's beauty and brains, eh? Give that to you. I think hearing all of you speak about insights, I think I could also just add my own 2 cents, from things that I'm also quite aware of that tend to influence perception on individual decision making and judgment in the workplace. Perception plays a very, very crucial role in organizational behavior. It influences judgment from both employees and employers on how they should take decisions and what decisions to take. And all of that is very it's very subjective. Different people may have different perceptions, although we could be referring to the same event and something similar, but we just have different perceptions and how to tackle it. For instance, a manager might interpret an employee's lack of participation in meeting as lack of engagement, but whereas there could be a deeper meaning behind it, like maybe the employee is an introvert and more into writing down their ideas than actually speaking out there, and maybe now they judge it as incompetence. So that's something that I've also come across.
So I read a report 2 years ago about the halo effect, and I didn't get much clarity. Do you mind touching on it?
Yeah, that is actually a good one. The halo effect and bias, they tend to work hand in hand. Cognitive biases, they frequently affect perception. An employee's work output may not justify the halo effect, which assumes the punctual employees are highly productive, and a more accurate assessment can be tainted because of initial impressions. How I believe a person first makes an impression to me or greets me might now influence what decision I make, and which is not a very good one. So that's where the halo effect tends to go wrong.
Right, Monet, you spoke of perceptions and how that may affect people, but there'll also be good and bad perceptions. So could you please just briefly outline how bad perceptions may affect the hiring process?
It tends to be very tricky when it comes to the hiring process, because in order to assess a candidate's competency, interviewers occasionally rely on more surface level indicators like the confident handshake, the eye contact, But now this also sometimes leads to poor hiring outcomes because they may be result on reliance on perception rather than the actual facts. A lot of attribution errors occur when managers mistakenly blame missed deadlines on internal factors like laziness, when in fact, in external factors like system malfunctions and competing priorities may be to blame. And all of this could have been easily indicated earlier if, addressed by someone who is fit for the job. But because you based it on, oh, that is a nice handshake, he's good for the job, then you only realize this thing when it's long done and it's, down there, But, unfair treatment may also just arise from all of these things because you may be passed up on promotions and job opportunities because of such things. And, and although negative perceptions can be detrimental, favorable perceptions can also present chances. A junior employee who regularly offers to help out might be seen as proactive, which could lead to a larger project opportunities, though his assessment isn't always correct. It takes one good decision to change the company's future, just like it takes one bad one to change it. And just in conclusion, I think perception has a big influence on how people and leaders in organizations decide and judge things. It affects workplace interactions, hiring, promotions, employee evaluations, all those things. And organizations should train leaders to question presumptions, lessen biases, and make evidence-based decisions in order to improve decision making. Because in the end, workplace outcomes in the organizational behavior, they're influenced by both what is real and what people may perceive to be real. I think that is just my own fair bit I can just add into it. And I think before we just, touch on the last guest of the day, Offense, I think we'll just go for a quick ad break and we'll be right back. And we're back, and our last guest today is, the quite remarkable and intelligent Offense, and he's just gonna talk about the importance and the effects of linking individuals in the workplace. The floor is yours.
All right. So typically within the hiring and recruitment process, there's a process in which first people apply. So they will find an opening, let's say online, in the newspaper, social media. There are numerous channels these days. So typically applicants send in their academic qualifications, their background to the company. And then nowadays there's usually an automated computer system process which goes through the applicant's documents and whatnot, and then the best applicants within that pool are selected. So from that point onwards, there may be a first round of interviews in which people ask more elementary and non-specific questions just to gauge on why they apply to the company, what their goals are, and stuff, and such as their background. And then in more thorough companies, they may undergo a second round of interviews in which they ask more specific questions, such as which relates to their let's say their character, what they want to do, and be more honest about what they aim to achieve within the company. So as the field of industrial psychology and human resources has matured and become more fleshed out over time, when people are recruited for a particular job, they typically undergo an onboarding process in which they're familiarized with the workplace, not just environmentally, but also socially as well. Especially as we've learned through study that younger people, which are typically the ones which are recruited and are prioritized within the recruitment process, not only value safety and security within the workplace, but also a sense of enjoyment and a sense of belonging. So it typically occurs is for them to be familiarized with the environment so that they can better understand where they need to go in order to attain this, or who they need to interact with in order to attain certain types of information. And also another thing which is important is that, let's say a company or an organization is looking for, let's say, a team leader or a supervisor. So someone who would be ideal for such a role would have to be someone who has effective communication skills, is effective, reliable, consistent, and punctual. Because obviously they set the precedent for the other team members to do their jobs. As they're the one that lay out tasks, verbalize what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and ensure that people meet deadlines.
Can I just quickly interrupt you? So what would you say are the potential dangers of recruiting someone who is misaligned with their job, tasks, and the overarching organizational culture?
That can be a serious problem when not done well, because what can occur is that employees can feel isolated or be intimidated by the complexity of a task. So let's say they did not receive a thorough enough explanation as to what they need to do and when they need to do it, and even what resources are available to them in order to complete a particular task. So for example, let's say a certain task needs someone who has a lot of experience within a certain domain. What would be valuable there is someone who is familiar within it so that they don't feel intimidated by what they need to do. And also another problem that can actually occur, let's say for example an employee repeatedly fails to complete various tasks. That may result in the employer or their supervisor thinking that they're incompetent and misaligned with the role, and then firing them, which can naturally make the fired employee feel distressed and feel as though that they were unfairly dismissed, which can escalate, quite unfortunately for the company, as it can result in legal cases, which in turn result in accumulating reputational and financial costs, as is typically the case whenever employees go to the CCMA and complain about why they were dismissed and whatnot. Because in certain cases, it's not that people are incompetent or unfit for a role, but rather that they were just not facilitated within it properly. Which can actually come not just financial cost to the company, but also they could miss out on a talent who could be vital within the company and help them achieve their long-term goals.
Thank you very much. And I think we've all gained a lot of insight from today's episode. I don't know if you're tired of seeing them just as much as I am, but that was another episode of HR Unplugged, and I'd like to thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
See you on the next one.